Okay, event has started. Welcome, everyone. Our guests are now coming into the Zoom room. No matter where you are in the world, thank you for joining us today for this event, the latest in our event with Bentham Science Publishers. My name is Scott, coming to you from Tokyo, Japan, and I am a science communications training consultant based here in Tokyo, and I work with researchers here in Japan and around the world, helping them to communicate their science to a global audience. And I can see that we have a global audience here for this event today. As always, we love meeting researchers from all around the world. So feel free to jump into the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. We'd love to know where in the world you are. Also, feel free to let us know the kind of research that you're doing. That's always interesting to hear as well. So feel free to let us know who and where you are and what kind of research that you're doing. And as always, I'm joined for this series by my colleague and friend, Professor Gareth Dyke. Gareth, how are things today?
Brilliant. Yeah, not bad. Thank you very much. Everything's going well. How are you doing, Scott? Everything okay with you?
Doing very well. As you can see, a giant screen behind me. I hope nothing will appear on that screen surreptitiously as we're presenting today. Otherwise, doing fantastically well, thank you. And we hope all of our guests are doing wonderfully well today, no matter where you are and what you're doing today.
I can see people joining us from Pakistan, from Poland, from India, from Nigeria, which is fantastic, Indonesia, India, the Philippines, Ethiopia. Wow, great. Do let us know where you're from. And as Scott mentioned already, do tell us a little bit about your subject area, what you're working on, so we can get involved and maybe provide some insights later in the Q&A. Egypt, Pakistan, Nigeria, a global audience for this one, Scott. Fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah, as always. And as we mentioned earlier, we love meeting researchers from all around the world. And we believe very strongly that no matter where you're doing research, your research deserves to be heard globally. And speaking of publishing your research globally, a bit about our friends and colleagues at Bentham Science Publishers. As you can see on the slide here, Bentham is a leading scientific, technical, and medical research publisher with a voluminous number of online and print journals, many with impact factors, all of them robustly and ethically peer reviewed, as we'll talk about tonight. It's very important. Also, publisher of ebooks and print books. And feel free to check out Bentham Science Publishers. We'll put the links into the chat so you can investigate and explore some of the journal titles that are available. And if you are a librarian, library sciences manager, or if you just work for an institution and you would like to have access at your institution to Bentham's high quality journals, then just click on the QR code here and you can get an absolutely free trial with no strings attached for up to 3 months. It's a great deal, isn't it, Gareth, for institutions?
It really is. If you know a librarian, or maybe you are a librarian, as Scott just mentioned, do give this QR code a scan. You won't have to spend a penny piece. You'll be given free access to all of that Bentham content that Scott just outlined. Thousands of ebooks, hundreds of journals. You can see how you get on because this is a great route to publication for your researchers. If you're looking for a fantastic journal or ebook series, then have a look, get in touch. And our participants today will also get rewarded for their attendance, right, Scott?
Absolutely. We'll be sending a full certificate for attending tonight's event. So thank you again for making time. We'll also share with you the full video. In fact, some of you might be watching this on video. Maybe the time of day is not convenient for you. You might be watching this afterwards. Again, thank you for attending, whether it's here live in person or just watching the recording. We appreciate you making time. And we'll be sending that out tomorrow, 24 hours after the event. So check your inbox. We'll send you a link to the full video. Also has a full transcript. We realize many of our guests are not natives of English. So if you miss anything or you want to just review anything that Professor Dyke is talking about tonight, you get the full video transcript. It's skimmable, scannable, and we'll also send you the certificate on behalf of Bentham Science. So check your inbox tomorrow for those.
We'll get started in a minute. This slide just gives you a little bit of quite boring background information about me, but we'll come back to that in a moment. And this is what we're going to talk about In our event today, the importance of ethics, must know research and publishing ethics. One of our most popular presentations, right, Scott? People are always a little bit confused about research and publishing ethics. So we do love to give this presentation.
We do, and we realize that the vast majority of researchers are ethical and good-hearted people. And in most cases, when there are ethical issues, it's simply because we don't know if we're doing something wrong, or maybe we're not clear on some of the policies or ethical guidelines around research and publishing.
So we'll go through this today. We'll get started in just a moment. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us and for putting your name and information, like where you're from, I should say, in the chat. That's always so fantastic to see. Also, those subject areas. We'll get going. I know there's going to be quite a lot of polls and interaction in this Bentham Science Sidetrain event this evening, and lots of time for questions. So if you do have a question, put it in the chat box. We'll be back a little bit later to answer any questions or any feedback, any other information that you'd like to get as a result of this event today. Don't forget that we're here to help. Scott and I, we do these events in order to try to help researchers around the world understand and get as much as possible from the publishing process. So, in this webinar, the must-know information of research and publishing ethics, we're going to be talking about 5 key elements: the importance of research ethics, the ethics of research data collection, the ethics of writing and citing, how to submit, ethics of submission and the peer review process, and then finally a little bit about copyright and ownership, which we do find to be one of the most important parts of this webinar. So do stick around to the end, because not a lot of information probably has previously been given to you in this area. Publishers certainly don't make it available. There's training out there, but not a lot of it talks about what you own as a researcher after you've decided to publish your work, either in a traditional subscription journal or online in an open access journal. So do stick around. That's a really important part of our event that will come up a little bit later. But let's begin. Let's kick things off. Let's get started by talking a little bit about the importance of research ethics. Why is it so critically important to be as ethical as possible when putting your work together as a researcher and then putting it out into the public domain, when publishing it after you've collected data, for example? A few great reasons to be ethical, or as ethical as possible, in your research and publishing. This maintains public trust. It ensures the proper use of funding, which is critical. If you've been given funding by your government, by your funding agency, you need to use that funding in the most effective way. It protects research subjects' health and rights, ensures accuracy and reliability. You'll want to be giving people proper credit for the work that they do, for their hard work, as well as promoting scientific integrity. And being an ethical, above board, fully transparent researcher is also really important because it aids collaboration with other researchers around the world and will speed up scientific process. And we talk about this all the time as we go round that famous sidetrain publication hamster wheel, and researchers are always at various different stages of the cycle: ideas, funding, data collection, journal selection, article writing, submission and peer review, promotion and publishing, and the cycle continues. And when we talk to researchers, we usually do get the sense that people have several things on the go at once, several plates spinning all at the same time. You may have something on the go at every stage of this publication cycle. And ethics matter, of course they do, at every stage. That's why we're going to spend some time in this presentation today talking about the ethics of research data, the ethics of predatory journals, the ethics of writing, citing, and plagiarism, as well as submission and peer review, and ethics of publishing and copyright. Because, as Scott mentioned, many researchers do tend to be unaware of lots of these issues and therefore can inadvertently make mistakes that can cause a problem in the future in your publishing career. So it's better to be aware of many of the issues that we're going to talk about in this event, many of the guidelines, the ethical standards that we should be adhering to in order not to make any inadvertent mistakes. And to begin with, then, we have this checklist for finer research. When you think about your research and you think about research projects, you plan a research project, it's very important, very informative to go through the finer checklist. Is the research feasible? Is the research interesting? Is the research that you're going to be doing novel? Is it ethical? And is it relevant? So when you come up with a new research idea, or you're thinking about a new idea for a piece of research, a knowledge gap, an idea, a hypothesis, something that you're going to work on, something that you're going to test, let's have a think about this FINER checklist, the finer checklist for research. And note that ethics is in the finer checklist, a key, fundamental, core component of doing great research. And so, when performing a research project, let's keep in mind these 7 key ethical principles. Follow those guidelines. We've listed a few of them for you here. We'll talk about some other guidelines over the course of this event today. Protect your subjects, get informed consent, protect private personal information, don't cheat. Goes without saying, really, but often people do tend to do this a little bit inadvertently. Don't steal, respect the copyrights of other researchers, state the true authorship on the papers that you're producing, submit your work to journals ethically, very important, and of course as well you'll want to be avoiding any conflicts of interest. And Scott's back, I think, probably with our first poll of the evening. Scott.
Coming up on the poll soon, yes, but I just wanted to mention that this is one of my favorite slides from your talk. I think if I could just snapshot one slide or recommend our guests to keep one slide in mind from tonight's talk, it would probably be this one, because I think on the left-hand side, these 7 basic principles are, I think, vitally important and cover most of the ethical issues that authors or that my clients run into when they're submitting to journals. So I just wanted to mention to our audience today, this is a great slide to bookmark for later.
Take a screenshot, absolutely. And if you need any further information or links to any of the guidelines that we share with you this evening, do let us know. So your target journal will have an ethics policy statement. So once you've selected a journal for your next paper, do have a look at its ethics guidelines. Your university as well, if you're a PhD student or a master's student, you'll be expected to follow the guidelines that your university has laid out. There's the Equator Network, which is a fantastic starting point for all kinds of clinical, non-clinical research. Do take a moment to have a look at the equatornetwork.org, because there probably is a checklist in there that will be applicable to you and your research, as well as COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, publicationethics.org, and then the Singapore Statement, the ICMJE, and so on. We'll put links to many of these in the chat, but do ask us if you have any further questions. Lots of guidelines are out there. We understand that it can be a little bit confusing. Here, for example, are the Equator guidelines for common study types. If you're doing a case report, a qualitative study, an observational study, a systematic review, for example. I note a question already in the chat about retrospective studies. Do go to the equatornetwork.org as a starting point to answer any questions that you might have about what you should be doing in terms of guidelines before you start an experimental study. So that's a little bit at the beginning of our event this evening around the importance of ethics in research, why this area is so key. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about research data, how, what, and who should be doing this, and how you can ethically collect data, beginning with a bit of information about respect. respecting people's rights, studies involving people, what to do before starting studies with assigned groups, getting those informed consent, permissions from your participants, safeguarding personal details, maintaining data privacy, and of course, securing all data. Very important to have a think about these issues because if you don't and try to publish, then you're going to run into those journal ethics guidelines. So do have a look at your target journal as well. Don't be going in and hacking those data analyses. Very naughty, a range of different kinds of ways that you can massage and hack your data collection are shown on this slide. Are you aware of these 5 common types of unethical data hacking? As we like to call it, dredging for data, fishing for data, p-hacking, reanalyzing your data using different tests until you get a significant P number, harking, and cherry picking. So you have a hypothesis in mind. Let's go and massage the data until we get a statistically significant piece of support for that data. You shouldn't be doing that. These are unethical approaches to the collection and analysis of data. You should always be analyzing your data fairly. You should always be presenting your data as well completely and transparently when publishing your work, especially as a data-based researcher. You want people to be able to go and repeat your study. Sharing data is critically important. It's necessary for transparency, reproducibility. You'll encourage collaboration and cross-disciplinary research, data reuse and efficiency, public trust and accountability, and of course, very important, compliance with journal and funding agency policies. And in many, many cases, you may very well be mandated to share your data by a funding agency and if you're publishing it in an open access journal. But in our opinion at SciTrain Bentham Science, you should always, always, always be making the data upon which your study is based freely and fully accessible to everybody on publication. There's many good reasons to share your data. Number 1 on the list is that other people can reproduce your study, and that of course gives it that extra layer of credibility. So that's ethics overall, the importance of research ethics at the outset. A little bit about the ethics of research data, and of course we could go on for hours and hours on each of these topics, and if you'd like more information for your university or for your research team, do get in touch with us. We'd be very delighted to show up online, present online for your university, for your research team, an expanded version of any of these or other core topics that we do have available at SciTrain. If you haven't seen our website, scitrain.com, do have a look at that as well. But for now, let's move on and talk a little bit about the ethics of writing and citing. Very important and actually a core area of confusion amongst researchers because, of course, for many of our audience, as Scott will attest, English might not be your native language. So confusion abounds, right, Scott?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, because this event is only 1 hour, we could easily spend hours and hours on just on each of these 5 topics today. So hopefully, if you would like more information on these topics, please reach out to us. And for those of you who are joining us for these events regularly, thank you very much. We are developing some new topics and events for you to enjoy in the future as part of this series. So we'll keep you posted on new events as they come out. In the meantime, here's our first poll quiz for today. I'm going to launch the poll here. Let me see if I can get this going. Okay, the question is, which action would not be considered ethical authorship practice? A, listing all contributors who meet authorship criteria. B, including a senior professor who gave no input just in case. C, agreeing on author order before writing the manuscript, also known as an authorship prenup or prenuptial. I love that. And D, sharing corresponding author duties among team members. Interesting questions. Okay. let's see what our guests think today.
Authorship is one of those really, really key areas where lots of people have questions, and I'm sure we'll get some at the end of our event today as well, and a bit of confusion, like what constitutes authorship, how to list the authors on a paper. Very, very interesting.
Definitely. Okay, let's end the poll here and see what answers our guests came up with. So we have, just share the results with everyone here. Looks like the choice B is the one that our audience zoomed in on tonight, including a senior professor who gave no input just in case. That is correct. This is something that we hear about all the time and we get questions about all the time, isn't it, Professor?
Absolutely is. Like A, C, and D are things that you should be doing as a researcher. You should be listing all of the authors who meet those authorship criteria. You should be agreeing on the authorship order. This is a great recommendation. If you do this before you begin to write, you won't run into any problems later. As Scott mentioned, the authorship prenup is really key, and that just protects everybody. I mean, imagine you write a paper up for publication and then it gets into a really good journal. There's going to be a cat fight amongst everybody involved as to be who gets to be the first author. But yes, including senior professors or any other team members just because you feel you should or just in case is not ethical authorship practice, right?
Yes, and thank you, Professor. C, that best practice that you mentioned, I learned from you, and I think it's a vitally important approach to have this agreement in place with your authors and decide on the order of authorship. And yes, it's a difficult conversation to have sometimes. By avoiding that difficult conversation, you can sometimes have conflicts later. So thank you for teaching me the concept of the authorship prenup. I've used that with my clients here in Japan. So thank you, Professor.
It's really important. Yeah, I've been involved in a number of fights in the past about who's the author and the authorship order. Usually when a piece of research gets published in an unexpectedly high impact journal, which people weren't necessarily expecting. I mean, it's easy to say, well, I don't need to be an author or put me third or but when the paper gets accepted for Nature, you definitely are going to come back and say, hey, I should be the first author, right? And so that's why you do the authorship prenup before you get started. And when writing, make sure that you do always cite the work of others. Very, very, very important because more citations are always better than less. You can edit, you can delete later. Put in those review papers, they're especially useful. You will want to show in your research, in your articles, that you have a good understanding of the field. So you'll cite older as well as more recent literature. Avoid citing too many of your own papers. This is something that we'll come back to, I'm sure, in the Q&A. People often ask us how many of my own papers is acceptable to cite. And you will want also to use a citation management tool. We are aware of many, but we usually recommend tools like Mendeley Cite, for example, help you keep track of what you've read. Paraphrasing, very important. How to cite safely in your work. You'll be reading and making notes on sources using those reference management AI tools and software, and Scott has been looking at these in detail, so he'll be able to talk to that in a moment. Translating and using AI tools to make a same length alternative version is a great way to paraphrase a piece of text that you've read that you like in a paper that you would like to then use in your own work. Retranslate that text back to English and change the case is another good technique that we have. And it's much better to do this than put loads of quotation citations in your paper. That makes it really hard to read, right? It's got lots of quotations in the
That's right. Direct quotations can be a minefield. It can cause issues. And a good thing to point out for my clients and students here in Japan is that these are not techniques. These are excellent techniques that Professor Dyke is sharing. They're not for meant to cover your tracks. They're meant to be cited as well. You need to paraphrase and then cite them. This is not a way to cover any citations that you have included in your work that you're not citing. Of course, you have to cite all of these in addition to using these techniques to reword them, change the wording a bit so that you have properly paraphrased them before you also cite them? Just to mention that for those who might be listening.
Yeah, these are techniques to help you take text from a paper that you're reading and ethically reuse it in a rewritten way, in a paraphrased way in your own work. Of course, you want to do it, but you should always cite the source. Even if you're rewriting, even if you're paraphrasing, you must make a citation. So make those notes on key messages in your sources. Emphasize that message when citing. Group your articles together so you can cite sets of earlier literature, and ensure that you always cite fairly and in a balanced way so that the work of previous researchers is clearly, honestly, and even-handedly presented. Even if you think that Scott's recent paper is absolutely terrible, you wouldn't say that in your paper. You'd say, while I disagree with the earlier work of McCleary 2026, I rather argue X, Y, and Z. So be fair, be polite, be even-handed. Avoid those overly aggressive or negative citation approaches that we've all seen in previous work. Referees and editors, peer reviewers and editors will pick up on those and not be impressed. It's a good way to get your paper rejected. So far we've talked about the importance of research ethics overall. We've talked about the ethics of research data briefly, and we've talked just now a little bit about the ethics of writing and citing. Let's have a quick look now at submission and peer review, because this is also an area of confusion amongst the researchers that we chat with all over the world every day. Submission and peer review. And indeed, here comes quick quiz number 2, just to make sure that you're still awake and still with us. Scott, how are we?
Doing great. Here's our second pop quiz for today. The question is, imagine that you're reviewing a paper as a peer reviewer. What is the most ethical response if you realize the manuscript you're reviewing closely resembles your own unpublished work? A, continue the review, the peer review that is, and reject the paper. B, immediately publish your own paper to beat them to it. C, notify the journal editor and recuse yourself from the review. Or D, copy the manuscript for your own records. Interesting scenario and not completely unheard of, is it, Professor?
Absolutely. I was just going to say, like, I've seen all of these happen in real life, like when I used to work as a journal editor. And I've also experienced this from my own research perspective as well. It's going to be really interesting to see what our audience this evening, this afternoon, is going to go for here. What should you do if you're a reviewer in this situation?
Okay, let's check the answers from our guests today. I'll end the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's check the results together. It looks like most of our guests today selected C, notify the journal editor and recuse yourself from the review. Is this the correct answer, Professor?
I would say so. Absolutely. Yes, definitely. Although you could also, as people have noted here, like immediately publish your own paper to beat them to it. But no, I mean, your best course of action here, of course, if you see this happening, if you are a reviewer and you see this going on, do get in touch with the journal editor and recuse yourself from the review. Something may be going on here, but you want to be out of the situation as a peer reviewer. Really interesting to see those results, though. Thank you, everyone. So moving on, let's have a quick look at submission from publication, submission to publication, peer review, the peer review process. And as Scott mentioned at the beginning of our event today, Bentham Science actually is one of the most robust amongst international publishers in terms of how peer review is carried out. Nobody ever gets to peer review a paper at Bentham Science if they are not themselves an experienced researcher with an H index greater than 5, and also editors at Bentham Science journals are never involved in the selection of peer reviewers. That's done in-house by the manuscript management team and a range of AI tools. So you can be both sure and confident that your paper sent to a Bentham Science journal will be robustly peer reviewed and fairly peer reviewed. But the whole process can take a little bit of time. Submission, peer review, revising and resubmitting, eventual acceptance, and then finally you get to see the paper published. We would say that in this process, you'll want to watch out for fake journals, often also known as predatory journals, because of the open access publishing model that's used by many publishers and journals around the world these days. A fee to see the work published open access has created this business model where journals publishers are looking to try to cheat you out of your hard-earned money and out of your research, and it can be quite difficult to spot the difference between real and fake predatory journals. Have a look at this quick checklist, another great one for a screenshot. What about the website? Is the journal indexed? Who's on the editorial board? Are they publishing regularly peer-reviewed papers on time? Are the papers being properly peer-reviewed? Do the papers that you see being published in the journal match with the journal's aims and scope? Are the fees being fairly applied? Never, ever, ever pay anything for the publication of one of your papers until after the paper has been peer reviewed and accepted. No submission fees, no peer review fees, no fees for getting the comments back from the peer reviewers. And watch your email, because predatory, dodgy publishers send lots and lots of spam emails offering lots of things. So watch out for these. And here is the list of things to look at in terms of knowing a real journal, right, Scott? What to think about with your journal selection.
Right, and the fake journals are getting trickier and trickier and more difficult to spot these days. Going back to the previous slide, the website, I would pay close attention to the URL. So, for example, if you're looking for a real publisher, such as Bentham Science, a fake publisher might have something like Bentham Science, blah, 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 blah. Maybe the URL has been altered slightly. The website might look legitimate because these days they look better and better. They look more real than they used to. But check the URL very carefully would be my tip. And then going on to the next slide, Professor, all of these are great indicators of a real journal. Are they listed in these resources on COPE, DOAJ, and so on? And do they state their peer review process? Is it clear? Is it transparent? And are the fees clearly listed? For my clients here in Japan who sometimes struggle identifying fake journals, these are the things I tell them to look for.
Have a look at these resources. Great one, thinkchecksubmit.org, doaj.org in particular. The DWAJ, as we like to call it, the Directory of Open Access Journals, which brings us to our quick quiz number 3. Which of these is a warning sign, Scott?
Right. Warning signs of a fake or predatory journal. A, it offers open access publishing. B, it has a very short peer review time, for example, just a couple of days. C, it charges APCs, article processing fees, or D, it is indexed in major databases such as Scopus, as we saw on the previous slide. Okay, let's see what our guests today think. What are warning signs of a predatory journal?
And we've all come across these. I mean, come on, you get lots of emails all the time asking you for this and that, to be a guest editor here and there, to submit a paper there and here. Like everybody is all the time being exposed to this. So you should have seen many of these yourself if you're listening to this.
Most likely, sadly, yeah. Let's end the poll here and see what our guests said. So, looks like everyone today zeroed in on B. It has a very short peer review time. Well, C can be true if those fees are requested before publication, as Professor Dyke just mentioned. If they charge the fees early, that can be a warning sign. But just having article processing fees themselves after publication is not necessarily a sign of a predatory journal, but definitely be that strangely short peer review time. It takes more than 2 days to properly peer review a paper, doesn't it, Professor?
Oh, absolutely. At Bentham Science, the average is around 4 to 6 weeks, and that's average, that's normal, that's standard across the publishing industry. Because, of course, you want your paper to be properly assessed for publication in a journal. You want it to be peer reviewed. You want to get back comments that will help you, the authors, improve your paper. Don't wait too long. Get in touch with the editor if too much time is passing, but definitely a short peer review time, as Scott mentioned, is one clear red flag that you should look at. I mean, you can look at journals that you're choosing for your next paper and have a look at their metadata and see when the papers were first reviewed and when they were accepted, because a short couple of days turnaround is not great. Can you submit? Here's a few things to check before you do. Has any of your paper or part of it been published before? Does the journal that you're targeting accept submissions that have been pre-printed? Does presenting your work at a conference affect your ability to submit to this journal? Let's check that as well. That's a question that we get a lot from researchers. Does your journal of choice have an embargo on previously shared research? Is your submission merely a thinner slice of a bigger study? And is this a translation of a previous publication? These are all things to think about before you put a paper together. And do ask us in the questions at the end of this presentation if you have any questions, because we know it's not straightforward. It may be confusing. What can you publish and what do you have to cite if you want to include it in one of your peer-reviewed research publications? So check before you submit. Don't try to publish translations, summaries, excerpts, blogs, reports, preprints, working papers, discussion papers, or something previously published in a conference proceedings by you. Of course, these are all pieces of research, pieces of work that you have previously done before you republish them as a full article. And again, get in touch if you have any questions. There are no silly questions. We're here to help. It's usually okay to publish what you've previously published in other outlets like blogs, for example, but do check carefully and declare it to the editor. Your university thesis, assignments, essays, conference abstracts and posters may be citable in a subsequent peer-reviewed paper. Grant applications, patents, online trial registries. Check with the editor or with us if you have any questions about any of this in particular. And so finally, we're going to come on now to the ethics of copyright and ownership. Having talked about the ethics and the importance of research ethics, ethics of research data, the ethics of writing and citing, and the ethics of submission and peer review, here's a little bit of absolutely critical information that you may not have ever heard before or gotten before from another event like this about copyright and ownership, because not a lot of people talk about this. They don't present this. Other publishers, other online courses don't really talk about this. How to protect your own work with copyrights. Copyright is yours automatically until you sign it away. So do have a think about journal policies. Do think about journal policies before making submissions. Very, very important. You own your research and its copyright until you sign it away. And if you put a paper on a preprint platform or send it to a journal, you're going to get what we call a document object identifier to protect your work, which is very important. Do consider open access publishing, because one key advantage of open access publishing is that you get to retain the copyright. You don't sign that over to the journal. And you can also use a preprint platform if you want, and we would argue that these are great places to begin the research and publishing process, a great place to put your work initially in order to document your discoveries earlier. Preprints and copyrights, absolutely fantastic, because the author typically retains copyright and you can then distribute the work freely off of the preprint platform before formal publication. Some journals may have specific policies on accepting manuscripts that were initially shared as preprints, and posting a preprint does not usually affect an author's rights to publish the work in a peer-reviewed journal later. Preprints can be cited by others. The use of that content is subject to copyright terms set by you, the author, and you get what we call a Creative Commons license, a CC license for your preprint that facilitates sharing. So open access publishing, preprinting your research before peer review. We are big advocates of that. But as I mentioned already, usually authors retain copyright for their work, which allows you to control reproduction, distribution, and public display, not the publisher. You get to choose from a range of different licenses like Creative Commons in order to specify how others get to use your research. A big, big, big advantage of open access publishing. Because in traditional publishing, publishing in a journal that appears behind a paywall that's only accessible to subscribers, or on a document document delivery service, pay for one download, for example, authors usually grant publishers the right to publish and distribute their paper, which often involves a transfer of the copyright in traditional journal publishing. So you may not end up owning the copyright to the work that you've just done, for example. So copyright protection. Open access publishing allows authors to reuse their own work in the future and share it with colleagues with, of course, proper attribution. And your copyright protection for scientific papers typically lasts for your lifetime, plus a number of years varying by country. So a common question that we do get, Scott and I, can I share my work? Well, if you've got copyright, then you can, even for commercial purposes. But if you've signed the copyright over to a journal in a traditional or subscription publishing model, for example, and I used to sign those copyright transfer forms without reading them willy-nilly, getting the work would then be transferred over to the publisher. I no longer own the copyright to lots of the papers that I've published. So if I wanted then to reuse a figure in a textbook, for example, I might then end up having to ask the publisher for permission to do that. So that's not fair. You may have to go back to the publisher who now owns the copyright to your work to ask them for permission. And this is another reason why open access publishing is a great idea, because you often get to publish with either a CC BY-NC license or a CC BY full license in open access publishing. So you get to reuse what you've published for both commercial and non-commercial purposes. Depending on the publisher, do check those CC licenses. Different open access publishers have different regulations. Bentham, for example, usually publishes open access using a CC BY-NC license, whereas other publishers give you full and unrestricted commercial rights to your work in the future. So let's have a quick look at Scott's quick quiz number 4. Scott, how are we doing? You're muted.
Doing great. I think my mic was not muted there, or was muted. Pardon me. Doing great, and we got some great questions coming in for our Q&A. Let's try our final poll for today. I'm going to launch the poll here. I can hear. I'm having some trouble accessing my polls. Here we go. Okay, the question for poll number 4 is, when you write, an original article, who initially holds the copyright by default? This is a question that's popped up in our events before. Let's see if our guests can choose the correct answer. A, the journal you plan to submit to, do they hold a copyright by default? B, is it you, the author, who initially holds the copyright? Or C, the peer reviewers, do they initially get the copyright for your original article? Let's see what our guests think.
It's a bit of a test of whether you've been paying attention, ladies and gentlemen, because we did already give away the answer to this particular poll a few slides earlier. So there should be no excuse for getting it wrong, right?
It's the review quiz to see who's still awake and listening. Let's end our poll there and check the results together. I think most of our guests today correctly identified B as the correct answer. It's you, the author, at least initially, until
you sign it away, which can happen, as we've mentioned, in traditional journal publishing. Very, very important. And one reason why open access publishing is so popular, because if you choose to publish your work in an open access way, or you preprint and then publish subsequently, you get to retain the copyright, which is not a lot of people know that. And we do find that researchers are quite confused on this particular topic. So we're glad to present about it in this webinar. But as we've mentioned already several times, if you'd like us to do more or come back in the future and do a whole hour just on copyright, we'd be delighted to do that. What have we talked about today, Scott, in this webinar on ethics?
We covered through, we tripped through very quickly these five key topics: the importance of ethics in general, data, writing and citing, submission and peer review, and copyright and ownership. And we do have some great questions coming in on most or all of these topics here. I'm going to jump right into the Q&A if we could, Gareth, but first maybe we should show that QR code to our librarian guests joining today, or if you're from an institution that you would like access to Bentham Science's high-quality journals, books, and ebooks, then take a look at the QR code here, scan that, and the Bentham team will get back to you and set you up with a free 3-month trial.
Absolutely brilliant. I mean, if perhaps your institution does not yet have access to all of the fantastic Bentham journals and ebooks, now's your chance. Do scan the QR code. Brilliant. Let's get into those questions. And I've seen a number as well in the chat box. Some great stuff. Scott?
There's some great questions here. Very interesting questions. Let's see how we do. We'll try to answer them the best that we can. If we're not qualified to answer them, we'll try to get an answer for you. I think in most cases, Professor Dyke has the depth of experience to handle your questions, but sometimes we get stumped. Speaking of open access, here's a question from our guest, Nazia, who asks, how am I able to be cited by others or increase citations? And Nazia asks, do we suggest open access journals? Great question. I think your question is generally, do we suggest publishing in open access journals? As far as specific journals for your field, of course, we suggest that you do a thorough journal selection process. But in general, Gareth, do you recommend publishing in open access journals if someone wants to increase their site scores?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the data that we have that's collected by publishers on this very topic, Razia, I think, if I remember your name correctly,
Nazia,
that
yep.
Nazia, sorry, excuse me. Like if you publish in open access journals, you get 6 or 7 times more citations on average. So yes, that's simply because more people have access to the research once it's published. It can be easily downloaded, easily cited. Whereas if you publish in a traditional paywalled subscription journal, only certain people at certain universities will have access to the article. So yes, great idea to publish in open access in order to boost your own citations. And by the way, if you look at many articles that come out these days, have a look at those little colored wheels that you see on the top of the publications, the Altmetrics colored wheels, because those also help you to understand what's happening with your paper in real time.
Great, and I'll pop the link for Altmetrics into the chat window here in just a moment. Great question, Nazia. Thanks so much, and good luck in finding an open access journal to publish your next paper. And as we recommend to everyone, take care, choose well, and watch out for those tricky, not so nice open access journals. Great question. Thank you. Some other excellent questions here. Earlier, one of our guests asked, is it unethical to publish a study you presented at a conference? I was actually just in this situation myself. In general, no, but it depends on where you're submitting to. Journals have varying policies. You have to be transparent, of course. Professor Dyke, your experience with publishing a study that you had previously presented, it's quite common, isn't it? Especially
Yeah,
for
definitely.
PhD, pre-doc students and so
Absolutely.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on the kind of conference, as Scott just mentioned. Many conferences will get you to submit abstracts or even short articles to the conference beforehand, and they may be peer reviewed themselves and published in a conference proceedings volume or even the abstract. So let's say that's the case, then you would need to cite either the abstract or the conference proceedings extended paper. Make sure you do that. You're citing yourself, of course. There will otherwise be some examples of where you give something, present something at a conference, and there's no record of that in terms of the literature, in terms of abstracts or conference proceedings. In that case, I would just refer to the conference that you presented at in the text of the paper. But as we already talked about as well, it's always a great idea to pre-print your conference presentations, put the slides or whatever information you have onto a preprint platform. This makes it impossible for somebody else at the conference to listen to your talk and think, what a fantastic idea, and go off and do it themselves because they've got to cite the preprint that's protected by a DOI, by a document object identifier. Great question. Thank you for that question.
That's an excellent question indeed. And a related question for you, Professor. I know that you're very knowledgeable on preprints. This question from our guest asks, see if I can find it here. Um, what are the potential risks of sharing unpublished results on preprint servers? Oh, great question. Risks of publishing on preprint servers. Well, I guess preprint servers are a way to mitigate risk, as you just mentioned. If you publish on a preprint first before a conference, then you're actually protecting yourself from having your work pinched or stolen. But are there other risks associated with publishing on preprint servers, Professor?
Not really. I mean, this is a big misconception amongst researchers and indeed like amongst people in the publishing industry in general. Like a preprint is just a record of a piece of research in any form you like. You can preprint an abstract, you can preprint some slides from your talk, you can preprint a full article that you haven't yet submitted for peer review. It's just an early record of a piece of research. Research Square, Archive, BioArchive, MedArchive, eLife. There are many, many preprint platforms, as we call them, out there. And in some subject areas, if you'll know if you're a mathematician or an engineer or a physicist, preprinting research has been commonplace, computer science, for many, many decades in some subject areas, engineering, for example. And in mathematics, in physics, for example, work is not considered acceptable for peer-reviewed publication unless it's been thoroughly assessed and evaluated in an open way by the community. It's got to be accepted by that community of researchers. So the only risk I can think of preprinting your research is that some journals, very few, but some journals may not accept submissions of work that has already been preprinted. But it's a small number. It's only 10% or so of international journals. Most journals are very happy to look at work for peer review that already exists as a preprint. And we would argue, I mean, can't speak for Scott, but I would argue that we strongly advocate for doing this as researchers, just to get more visibility, comments, open accessibility for your research as a researcher. Scott?
It's a great way to establish some primacy and to get some early feedback. Yeah, I've learned that from you, Professor. Thank you. Great question about preprints. Excellent question, and thanks for your information, Professor. Here's a question from our guest that came up a bit earlier. Do we need ethical approval for a retrospective study? And I was thinking back and I actually was involved in one a couple of years ago. And in that case, sample size of one, yes, they did need ethical approval. I think the sticking point was anonymization of the subjects. That was the key point, was to make sure that the participants' identities had been protected. Now, that's just one experience that I had with a retrospective study. Professor Dyke, have you had an experience with retrospectives? And if so, was ethical approval required for that?
Yeah, usually it is, but check your journal, check your target journal, and it depends also what you mean by a retrospective study. I mean, are
Right.
you looking back at some research that you've done retrospectively and thinking, oops, I should have gotten ethical approval for that? I mean, because a big reason for rejection at medical journals is where people submit papers that have been given ethical approval after or during the study has been ongoing. You should always seek to get ethical approval from your institution and or from your national ethics approval board, or you can go even higher. You can go to like some multinational ethics approvals board. It's at the United Nations, for example, has one to get approval of your research before you start the study design, not just the data collection, but before you start the study design. That's the best way to go because medical journals will check this. They'll check the date on which you make your ethical submission. And if it's not before the start of the trial, then you could get your paper rejected. Scott?
And I will recommend again to our guests to visit the Equator Network. I'm just going to put the URL back into the chat here for ethical guidelines. Again, as Professor Dyke mentioned before you begin your study, that's equator-network.org. They have hundreds of guidelines for various types of studies, and probably retrospectives are in there as well. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure they are. And that will give you some sense of ethical guidelines you need to follow before or while setting up your study. So great question. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry if we didn't answer in a satisfactory way, but definitely check out the Equator Network. And thank you, Professor, for your information.
If you want to get in touch with us, you can do through the SciTrain website, of course, scitrain.com, or find us on LinkedIn. We'd love to get messages and connections on LinkedIn from all of our participants today. Sorry, Scott.
Indeed, and also you'll get an email from us, I think from me. The email's going out tomorrow with your full certificate and with a link to the video and transcript. So if you have any questions that we could not answer today, feel free to reach out to us there through my email. Great questions, everyone. Let's see if we have time to squeeze in one more question. Professor, what do you think?
Of course, absolutely. Let's do it.
Great question related to preprints here. This is a question from our guest earlier. Is it ethical to post a preprint if the journal doesn't allow it? Okay, well, I mean, in general, check the journal's policies and, of course, try to follow the journal's policies and guidelines wherever possible. Professor, have you had this experience where a journal forbade publishing of a preprint or?
Well, yeah, but usually, when you finish a piece of research or when you've got a piece of research in a form that you would like to preprint it. So, for example, you've done a conference presentation, you're not yet ready to submit to a journal, but you've done a conference presentation and there's no conference proceedings volume. Let's say you would then consider preprinting the slides from that conference presentation in order to protect the ideas, the IP, the research results. Okay, so usually then, right, you'd look to see the journal choices that you have. And it's 90% of journals in the world are happy if you've previously preprinted. Only like the real top tier Lancet, BMJ, Nature Science, like those real, that top tier of journals that care about priority and being the first to report on a fantastic new discovery, they're the ones that say we don't want to consider pre-printed research. And they do that just because they're basically news magazines that want to be the first to, you know, publish a groundbreaking, paradigm shifting piece of research. They don't want to have to, have that already shared since, weeks on a preprint platform. So, I mean, you wouldn't be publishing work and then pre-printing it. I think that's the essence of the question. You would be pre-printing work, research, and then finishing the paper, taking on board comments that you may get from the community or people who've looked at the preprint on Research Square or bioRxiv or wherever, improving it and sending it then out for peer review. So hopefully that helps. And there's lots of confusion about preprint platforms. So do get in touch with us if we can provide any further information. Thank you so much for the question.
These are great questions. And if we did not get to your question today, we apologize. Feel free to reach out to me through the email address. Just reply to the email that we're sending out tomorrow. We'll be sending out your certificate and a link to the full video. So again, any questions that remain, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get an answer for you if we can't answer it on the spot. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, as always. And thanks always to our friends and partners at Bentham Science Publishers. And as always, thank you, Professor, for lending us your many, many years of expertise with this information and in answering our questions. Thank you again, as always.
Have a great day, everybody. Always fantastic to do these events with you, Scott. Have a good evening. Take care, everyone.